guys. I didn't realize this until over the weekend that after Christmas I had moved it to the second, fourth Tuesday of the month because of the holiday. And then after we got through January, my original plan was to then go back to the first and third, so that's why we're kind of going back-to-back weeks. So now we're going.
I was like, gosh, am I losing it?
Yeah, that's what my wife said. You have it again? I thought you just had it last week. I said, yeah, it was playing this way. So we'll go today, and then we'll go again in 2 weeks. And then March and April will be the same in May. So first and third Tuesday. All right, today I want to talk about raising the bar. I'm hopefully going to get a lot of input from you guys as well. A lot of raising the bar, at least from my viewpoint, it centers around trust and relationships. And the thought is none of us in here will be able to raise the bar on our students or our players, our athletes, or the kids that we're working with on a day-to-day basis unless we start with a firm foundation in a relationship with those students. And a lot of our relationships, again, are built on trust. And so that's really what we're going to take a look at today with raising the bar. And I think there's probably three really good viewpoints to take a look at raising the bar. And think of it maybe from all three perspectives. One, as a coach or a sponsor. Josh Metcalf talks a lot about, as a coach, we need to love and encourage our athletes, our players, our students. Okay, and again, it goes back to that trust and foundation of relationships. Try to take a look at things today also from maybe your players or your kids' viewpoint, and where hopefully your kids and the students you're leading are trusting you as a coach or a sponsor, and they trust that you are giving them your very best on a day-to-day basis. And if you're doing that, if you have an athlete that you pull aside and you just spontaneously ask them, hey, do you trust that I'm giving you my all every day? If they can honestly say yes, looking in the eye and say yes, I guarantee they trust you. And they're probably doing their best for you every day. And then try to take a look at today from both perspectives, a coach and a player, and being able to fall in love with the journey. Because that's really what we're all involved here, is a journey, a process of trying to be excellent in everything we do on a day-to-day basis when we lead our kids. Now, Will Ferrell's a pretty funny guy. Okay, did anybody follow him on Twitter during the Super Bowl? All right, for whatever reason, I saw a retweet, and he was included in it, so I was following him during the Super Bowl. He had really good seats, and he had some really funny tweets. But how many of you have seen I don't remember, the Kicking and Screaming, maybe? The soccer movie? Has anybody seen it? Okay, we're going to watch a short clip of the juice box scene, okay, with Mike Ditka. And this is a really funny scene. And the AD conference I went to in November, they showed the same scene, and it's fun to just watch because, I'll be honest with you, there were times in this scene that I'm like, you know what? I feel really dumb about this, but I think I've done that before. You know, where you kind of get pulled into that opposite direction of things that you probably shouldn't do as a coach or a leader or a sponsor. So we're going to watch the clip, and again, I want you to think about that foundation of trust and relationships from a coach's or sponsor's perspective, but also your player's perspective as we watch the scene. It's really short, about a minute and a half.
Hey, Phil, I don't think that's a very good attitude. You can't talk about hurting other players. You don't think? You don't think? I don't think you should be butting in when I'm talking to my team. You're my assistant, okay? You're supposed to back me up and go get me juice boxes when I tell you. Now go get me a juice box. You know who you're talking to? I'm talking to the juice box guy. You're crazy. I'm not crazy. I'm just thirsty. Why don't you go to hell? No, you go to hell. Why are you there? Why don't you grab me a juice box? I'm no juice box boy, I'll tell you that. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. You're like your old man. I'm not like my old man. If it wasn't for these kids, I would whip your butt. I can take a punch. I'm out of here. Bye-bye. I'll see you, Mr. Big Time Coach. Bye-bye. I'm not like my old man. I'm a kind and gentle, compassionate human being with a heart as big as a lion. We'll see you later.
break down that scene, which is pretty short, there were a number of places he probably went wrong as a coach, right? First one was, who do you argue with at the beginning? His assistant coach, okay? How many of you have argued with an assistant coach maybe a little bit more publicly than you had hoped for at one point or another in practice, game? I have. Okay, thanks for being honest, Al. I have as well, all right? And you're only going to be as strong as your relationships are with the strength amongst your assistant coaches, okay? And a disagreement, and they publicly disagreed in front of all these little kids and all the adults, all right? And it was very public, and it showed cracks in the relationship. Where else did he go wrong? Yeah, telling him to hurt a player, okay, and the safety side of it. That's obviously something that, and most of us probably have not gone that way, okay? Where else?
Just yelling and screaming.
Yelling and screaming. Did you get the sense that it was kind of a culture of compliance more than anything? Especially when he said, "Come on, get your hands up." When he'd ask questions, some of the kids are like this, and come on, parents too. It's kind of like there's a disconnect in the relationship between coaches and players, coaches and parents. Anything else that you saw where he maybe went awry?
He was a big bully, really.
Yep. He used maybe his power as a coach more so than a leader should. Yep. It's a great clip where, again, you can kind of see little things like, you know what, I get it. That's something I've done before, maybe, too much of the compliance mode, stuff like that. So, an interesting viewpoint nonetheless. All right. We already talked a little bit about what coaches could take away from this. How about players? Is there anything a player could take away from watching a clip like this?
It makes me think of, when you tell your kids don't, listen to what they're saying, not the tone that they use, because, that's not maybe a good example, but a lot of times coaches have good things to say, but in the manner that they say it, it's intimidating to little kids or kids in general.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Anything else? What else could a player take away from this?
It's not very fun.
Yeah.
It wasn't fun at all.
Not very much fun. You have a coach yelling at probably 8, 9-year-olds.
Yeah.
Going a little bit above and beyond. Was there any sense of trust probably from players and parents to the coach? No.
Oh, the one time the kid said, what did he say, your dad's
A trip or something.
dad's a trip.
Yeah. So the trust was not there, right? Okay. All right. A couple things to build your trust in relationships amongst your teams, and things that we probably didn't see in this short clip. Number one, love and encouragement towards your students, your athletes, your players. That will build trust. If a student honestly knows you care about them, and a lot of times care is centered around love and encouragement, they will trust you as a coach and as a leader. And you'll be able to tell that immediately. They'll do anything for you. As a young coach, I failed at this a lot because I felt like my power and authority as a coach was what I was going to use to get the respect of my kids. And I leaned on that probably too much at times. And when we build that trust, we can call it cultivated trust, something that we cultivate kind of like a farmer has to cultivate his field over time. If you garden, you have to cultivate the soil, you have to work the soil, and eventually over time in a season, and actually season after season, your garden or your farm, whatever it is, it gets better and better and better. So trust takes a long time to grow and build. And so I want you to think of it from a cultivation setting, where as time goes on and you cultivate that trust, your students and the kids that you lead, they will have an easier time trusting you in the decisions and a lot of times the hard decisions that you have to make. All right, now I want to also throw in the clause that because you love and care about your students, that does not mean you're getting soft and undisciplined with them. Okay, you have to realize that when you need to discipline your kids, whether it's at home, your actual kids, or your students or your athletes, they will adhere to that discipline more often when that trust is there. And so the message is not that you need to get soft on them and let them become undisciplined. Rather, the discipline will it will mold and take place after you've cultivated trust with them over time. And they will then be able to adjust and rise to those higher standards. Does that make sense? Okay, how many of you have seen this, good or bad, in the setting that you're in? Maybe anybody want to share an example, maybe where you jumped the gun and you didn't have the trust with those kids yet, and it was obvious, and maybe you hit a bump in the road, or maybe you want to share a story of, over time you cultivated trust with somebody that was maybe hard to coach, but by the time they were a senior, you saw that trust was there and you paid big dividends. Anybody have any of those stories?
I think, looking back over my coaching career, on occasion, there was a time where, I really got after a kid or a group of kids, for maybe not performing well or practicing well. And looking back on it, I always tried to go back and see, okay, after I did that, did I get the desired result and that I was really looking for?
Mm-hmm.
And very few times I did. When I really honestly look at it,
Yep.
there were very few times that, when I got after a kid because they, made a mistake or did the wrong thing, looking back, just watching them and watching their reaction to it, it probably hurt the trust. And then I realized later I had to go back and rebuild,
Mm-hmm.
which took more time and energy.
And hopefully you can share on that some. We're going to talk about that here in a minute.
Right.
How do you regain that trust?
How do you regain that trust? And so, granted, I can't say that I never got the desired result, but more times than not, it worked against me rather than for me.
Any other examples?
I was just thinking, you were talking earlier about being a younger coach and thinking that your idea of coaching was putting your higher power over top of somebody. And that's, when I first started coaching, that was kind of my thought too, is that's the way our coaches were, was that they just pounded on you and that was it. And, through the years, you just kind of learn that it's not about that. It's about, getting the result you want, whether that's winning games or whether that's trying to build, in my case, young men to be successful as they get older. And so you just kind of slowly try and figure out that happy medium because, I'm very close to some of those guys that I taught early, even though I pounded on them, but they also understood that I'd go through a wall for them too.
Yep. Yeah, and you've probably heard positional leadership versus persuasive. And that's really what we're talking about, where the positional leadership is a great, the Will Ferrell clip that we just watched, positional leadership versus persuasive. And again, persuasive is not soft. You're still disciplining, there's times where you need to have that card in your pocket of being hard on a kid. But it's not the continual pounding, you're still cultivating that whole time. You're cultivating that level of trust. And again, after that trust is there, the kids are they will be more willing to accept the higher standards, to live with the higher standards. When you call them out on the higher standards, they're more apt to follow you on that. But it takes time. Okay, Bill Walton, a good example. As I was preparing for this morning, I thought of Bill Walton. How many of you have heard the story about him showing up to John Wooden? It was about time for them to leave to a game. You've probably read it if you've read any John Wooden books. He shows up to the game. Coach Wooden had a policy in place for his student athletes, much like some of you probably do, where you had to be clean shaven. Especially back then, that was a lot bigger deal. And Bill Walton showed up one day. They were about ready to leave, and he had a beard. And without making a big scene, and it's different when the media is not as heavy as it is now, but without making a big scene, he basically pulled aside his National Player of the Year candidate, one of the top players in America, and he basically said, Bill, hey, your beard looks good, it looks great, but the guidelines, parameters we have set in place for our team, and he had him shave his beard. And because the level of trust that was there between Bill Walton and John Wooden, because that trust had been cultivated over time, Bill Walton adhered to it. He didn't make a big scene about it. He went about his business, clean shaven, and they kept winning games, and he went on to play that day. So just another great example. And Bill Walton, if you know him, he's not not exactly the easiest guy to get along with, probably. Okay? If you've listened to him on TV and if you've read anything about him, he's kind of a character. But John Wooden understood, you know, the fine line of trust and building relationships and how to manage him. Same with this next guy, Dennis Rodman. Okay, and I grew up watching this Pistons team, and when he played for the Bulls, I was a huge Bulls fan. You guys know Dennis Rodman does a lot of crazy stuff off the court. But is that within the control of the head coach? What Dennis Rodman does after a game late at night, not as much so as when he's part of a team, right? Dennis Rodman, he got crazier after he left the Pistons with the hair and the piercings, the tattoos. But I think of Dennis Rodman, he's a great person, and looking at his career, he's a great person to learn from. Because again, a guy with a different set of character traits, different kind of background growing up. But if you've watched anything, any documentaries of him with the Pistons, especially when Chuck Daly was his coach. Yeah, I just watched the Bad Boys 30 for 30 over Christmas, and I learned a lot on just watching that set of clips. Chuck Daly basically pulled Dennis aside, and he'd have conversations with him, and he built a relationship of trust over time. Dennis didn't have a father figure. He had a rough upbringing, but Chuck Daly pulled him aside and basically told Dennis all the time, Dennis, I just love watching you play. You play with so much passion, so much energy. I love watching you play, which is a phrase all of us need to use with our own kids and our athletes. I love watching you play, because that's what kids like to hear. And that means a lot coming from us. He pulled him aside and said, Dennis, I love watching you play. You bring so much to our team, so much passion, so much energy. You know your role. And over time, they built this awesome relationship where Dennis today will even say, and Chuck Daly's passed away, but he'll talk about how important Chuck Daly was in his life. Having somebody encourage him, build that relationship of trust. And if you know Chuck Daly also could yell a lot. And he was very disciplined. And when he needed to, he would discipline Dennis, and Dennis would adhere to it, despite Dennis Rodman being the guy that we think of off the court as being crazy and being out of control sometimes off the court. But when he was with that team, Dennis adhered to what Chuck Daly needed and wanted him to adhere to because he had a relationship of trust to him. Has anyone seen that 30 for 30? It's a good one. You can learn a lot from those documentaries. So, some questions to ponder as we get closer to closing. Number one, as a coach, or as a leader, as a sponsor, ask yourself every so often, am I trustworthy? Are my athletes, are they gonna trust me? Do I have a relationship with each one of my athletes and the kids I work with where they will trust me in good times and bad times to make the best decision for them? Whether it's disciplining them or the next play on the field having them make a play call. Okay? Are you consistent? And that's really hard to be also. Are you consistently trustworthy? Think back to the Will Ferrell clip. If this was just, this wasn't just one little blurb, one mistake, was it? You could probably tell over time this is just his coaching philosophy over time, right? And that was consistently doing the wrong thing. All right? Are you consistently doing the right thing to build trust and cultivate that trust over time? Again, consistency builds trust. And I'm going to go back to what Al alluded to here a minute ago. First of all, are we going to sometimes break trust? And are we going to damage the trust amongst our team? Yeah. Even sometimes when we make the right decision, what we feel is the best decision, that trust could be shattered or maybe slightly cracked, right? How do you regain that trust? How do you go about regaining some trust that may have been damaged for whatever reason, right or wrong?
Well, I guess the times that I've tried to go back and retrust is talking to kids, having a rational conversation. And I'll be honest, sometimes, when I really felt like I went too far, I've even apologized, and said, hey, this was my mistake, I went too far, I apologize, and, and made a commitment that I wouldn't let that happen again.
Yep.
And I think that's where a lot of players, if you follow through with that, you can regain trust. So.
That's a great lesson to
Mr. Micah Bishop, call the office,
own up
please.
and
Mr. Micah
apologize
Bishop.
for a mistake in front of the team. That takes a lot of humility, and the kids, that'll open the door to starting to rebuild that relationship. That's hard to do, but it's the right thing to do. Any other thoughts? How do you rebuild, regain trust?
I think they just need to see that you're gonna do the right thing over and over. You know, sometimes if you make one mistake, it's gonna take 4 or 5 more times to do the right thing to regain that trust a little bit.
Good point.
You know, Dan, I've been on some coaching staffs that have had someone be the good cop, someone be the bad cop. You know, I've never felt that that's worked. You know, because if you're asked to be the good cop, you know, you're not the one doing the damage.
Yep.
You know.
Pretty soon you become the coach everybody wants as the head coach.
Yeah, and then that creates a
At least from the
division.
parents.
You know.
Yep.
And I think something Al and I talked about earlier too is that I think any more kids these days need to understand that the coaching is not a dictatorship anymore either. It's not, you can't come in, like we talked about, and just say, this is the way things are done, this is how we've always done it, this is the way it's going to be done. I think kids need to have a little bit of, I don't want to say, they don't want to run the team, but they, you know, every kid wants discipline, and that'll never change, but I think they also want a little bit of, you know, hey coach, can I talk to you? And I'll say, no, you got my mind made up, get out. So, that's, again, you know, as we were growing up, that's kind of the way it always was, it's just, you know, we want to play for this team, these are your.
It's the guidelines. I sent out one of my Friday emails a couple weeks ago. I had a clip from Steve Kerr talking about that a little bit. And not giving full control over the team in a huddle, but trying to get more vested interest out of the team because you're at least giving a say, allowing them to have a say. Not just a play call, but just even talking. That makes a big difference.
I've learned that I got to treat my point guards a little bit like Peyton Manning. What do you see on the court? And I've had the luxury of having really good point guards that can do that, but you know, what do you guys see? Can you help me out? I think just even if they say 2 words, you know, I think, you know, we can post Tanner up or whatever. Yeah, let's do it one time, see what happens.
Good thoughts. Any other thoughts on that? All right, last but not least, the journey as we close. At the end, probably none of us, you know, someday when we're done coaching or leading or teaching, all of us will probably say we would have rather built more or better long-lasting relationships and winning more games or being more successful. That's obviously fun and that's something we all strive for, but the relationships and that trust that we can build over time is probably the more important thing and the more often than not the thing we're striving for. So, I mean, that last statement of life is short and tomorrow's not promised, that's a good thing for us to leave on. Take full advantage of the kids we're leading day to day, even though it may be something very small, something very big. Yep.
Last year at the boys' state basketball tournament, a previous town that I coached at was in the finals, and we went down and watched it and had a chance to reconnect with a lot of the football players that I coached 25 years ago, and spent a lot of time with some former players. We didn't once mention anything about any games we won. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. Talk about the fun memories, didn't you?
Yeah,
Fun
you know,
times.
it was more about, hey, remember this in practice? Remember we did this? Remember when this happened? And it wasn't ever about, you know, we qualified for state or whatever. It's just, you know, it's more about the relationships.
Yep. What's up? Any other
Mr.
final
Micah
comments?
Fisher, call the office, please. Mr. Micah Fisher.
The IN team, I don't know if you guys have seen it or read it, but it talks about like bringing the best out of people independently to bring them together as a team, to be interdependent. It's really good, kind of with this whole philosophy.
Awesome. All right, we better close up.
Yeah, the seniors coming here in about 3 minutes. All the seniors are meeting in here, so.
Sounds good.
Sorry.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming. Have a great day.
Thank you.
We're starting to start today.
Mr. Casey, come to the office, please.